So if you've been on my channel for some time, then you'll probably realize that I've already covered Max Payne 3 years ago. Max kills 660 people in the first game, which is 584 more people than John Wick killed in his first movie. In that case, why am I doing another video? Well, after having a look at some of my older videos, I want to revisit some of them and bring them up to the standards of my more recent content. I will probably be doing this more in the future, but don't expect it to be a common thing. I won't be constantly remaking videos from years ago. However, every once in a while I may go back to a game I've already talked about. The original video will remain viewable, however I've decided to unlist them so it is replaced with this video instead. If you want to watch the original video, I will have a link in the description. Anyway, on to the video. Remedy Entertainment is one of my all-time favorite developers. They have constantly put out unique and interesting games that I've always enjoyed experiencing. Not all of their games are perfect, but I still had an experience with them that no other game is capable of giving. Death Rally was their first game, and it is a pretty damn solid game, but the game that truly got them up the ladder was a 2001 third-person shooter named Max Payne. Max Payne was one of the biggest hits that year, selling over 5 million copies and receiving universal acclaim for its amazing game design and unique storytelling. The success of the game spawned a sequel, a movie, and is what put Remedy in the big leagues with companies such as Rockstar and Microsoft. Even to this day, Max Payne is considered one of the best third-person shooters ever made and is still loved by anyone who plays it. And since the game is now over 20 years old, I think it would be a good idea to look back on this wild game that was made by the video game equivalent of a garage band and see why it had the effect it did. Max Payne wasn't the first third-person shooter to exist. Games such as Winback in 1998 gave rise to the genre, but Max Payne is what truly pioneered it because of a few reasons. First being that Max Payne had smoother controls than any other third-person shooter on the market. Max moves fast, he's agile, and he's easy to control. He isn't slow or clunky by any means. He's able to run around whilst firing guns and dodging bullets. That automatically put the game above anything else in the genre at that point because no other third-person shooter could compete in terms of gameplay speed, tension, and smoothness. What I also like is that Max is in the center of the screen, making it easy to see your surroundings at any given time. But you may be asking, what else is there to the game? It controls well, but is there anything else that makes it stand out? Well, the main thing was bullet time. At any point in the game, Max can enter slow motion where the player has more time to react to their surroundings and they get to see all the bullets flying through the air as they dodge them. Max can also perform a shoot dodge where he jumps through the air in slow-mo whilst firing a gun. This allows the player to jump around gunfights whilst being harder to hit. The trade-off is that this advantage only lasts while off the ground. As soon as you land, you're an easy target. Though I do find it annoying that Max does immediately get up after being on the ground. I prefer the way it is in the second game, where Max will stay on the ground as long as you fire the gun, so that any enemies you missed in the shoot dodge you can take care of. The game encourages you to move around whilst dodging incoming fire and laying waste to criminals. The main influence for the game was films like Hardboiled, directed by John Woo. There is even a difficulty with that name. It's a far cry from what the genre would later become with its overabundance of cover shooters. Max Payne's gameplay was imitated for a short period, but it died out fairly quickly, and because of that, the game still has a unique style of gameplay. Instead of hiding behind cover and waiting for your health to regenerate, you're busting into rooms and painting the place with bullet holes. Bullets are also projectile-based, and because of that, the game plays like a 3D bullet hell. The enemy placement allows for multiple ways for you to ambush enemies, and vice versa. All the weapons in Max Payne have distinct strengths and weaknesses, and there is always a risk in using one of them. Some work better in groups, some work better for tight corridors, and some work better for running and gunning. What's also cool is that the levels can be explored quite a bit, and weapons as well as resources can be found by exploring the level. And every combat encounter can play out in several different ways depending on what weapon you choose to use in that fight. And since you can carry every weapon in the game at once and can switch through them all on the fly, you have a lot of options on how you want to deal with each encounter. It's not really a tactical combat style, but the player does need to improvise on the spot and make decisions on how to get through encounters. Another awesome thing is that when you shoot dodge, your magazine resets immediately. So if you plan out your shoot dodges correctly, then you can use 2 magazines without having to reload in between. Rolling also makes you very hard to shoot, but you can't attack whilst doing it. There is also the fact that Max is a glass cannon. He can certainly deal insane damage and take down groups of enemies, but he dies just as fast as they do. And that's what makes Max Payne's combat so satisfying. Every weapon has a unique strength, and you decide how to utilize it in that encounter. The game encourages you to stay on the move in order to dodge attacks, and there is the fact that any hesitation or bad moves on your part will likely result in death. Painkillers can heal you, but they take time to kick in, so you can't rely on them to save you. It's the fact that the combat has a very ephemeral feel to it. You can gun down hordes of enemies and it looks and feels so awesome, but at any moment it could all come tumbling down because you made a mistake. You could be doing so well and that can all disappear in a moment. Making the player strong in output but weak in input like this makes the game so tense and so satisfying at the same time. And this is what makes Max Payne's combat so great. The variety of weapons, the level design that encourages the player to stay on the move in combat, the improvisation on the player's part, and the glass cannon playstyle. Max Payne's gameplay is simple but is so engaging even 20 years later. And what's funny is that despite bullet time being the most iconic part of the game would still be great without it. Bullet time just gives the player more options and makes the game even better than it already is. There is more to the game than the combat though. The levels all have a lot of things to interact with, whether it be a vibrating bed, a television that draws parallels to the narrative, a radio, really anything in the environment can be interacted with, and it makes the world feel more alive. There are games 20 years later that don't have this level of interactivity in the environment. Plus there are extra story pieces you can find by exploring. The game is also paced very well, so that you never get bored. The 3-act structure allows for the game to calm down in terms of intensity and then build back up to it. That way the game never gets tiring or overwhelming. There are also some funny Easter eggs to find. For example, if you throw a grenade in this hole, rats will come out with pistols and try to kill you. Or this Dopefish Easter egg, or this Buffy the Vampire Slayer reference. It adds a lot of fun to the game. I only have a few problems with Max Payne's gameplay. First is the dynamic difficulty. Max Payne has a difficulty that adjusts to how well you play the game. If you do well, the game will get harder, but if you die too much, it'll get easier. The difficulty slider isn't as annoying as a game like Resident Evil 4, but it can be annoying when the game becomes needlessly difficult and I have to die a few times before it stops being unfair. I'd rather just have a set difficulty. There are also these nightmare sequences which work well story-wise, but gameplay-wise they can be annoying because of these stupid platforming sections. And some levels towards the end can have annoying sections like this trip mine part where you need to jump over, or this sniper section, or this section where you're moving on machinery that goes on for way too long. Otherwise though, I can't really complain that much about Max Payne's gameplay. Great weapon variety, great level design, great mechanics, and the player is encouraged to stay on the move, use critical thinking, and improvise strategies constantly. It's so much fun because of the back and forth nature of the game being satisfying to play, but also being extremely harsh with punishment. Even to this day, very few games in the genre have this type of playstyle. There are other bullet time shooters, but they all have a very different gameplay style to Max Payne. The closest thing is Fear, but even that plays very differently. There is really nothing else in the world like Max Payne, aside from Max Payne 2. And that's why this game is still worth playing 20 years later. It's not only a really well-designed game with a lot of fun gameplay mechanics, it's also a really unique game with nothing else like it. The gameplay of Max Payne was, is, and will always be brilliant. But there is another thing that makes this game worth playing. Max Payne is remembered just as much for its storytelling as its bullet time. Sam Lake was brought on to write the scripts for Death Rally, But for Remedy's next game, they would have to spice it up even more. Max Payne's story is very simplistic. Max's wife and child gets killed, and he seeks revenge on those responsible. What makes Max Payne's story memorable is the way it's told. The game uses comic panel cutscenes instead of the traditional in-game cutscenes. This was one of the smartest decisions Remedy ever made. The game was made on a small budget, and it would have been almost impossible to tell the story in an engaging way with these character models and animations. The comic panel approach made it so where they could get every necessary framing of the cutscenes just right. Plus, if the story changed throughout development, they wouldn't have to model, texture, and animate new cutscenes. They could just get new panels. These cutscenes make Max Payne's story timeless. They look just as great and are just as engaging now as they were 20 years ago. What is also funny is that the models in these cutscenes are a bunch of Remedy employees and their friends and families. For example, Sam Lake is the model of Max Payne, his mother is the model of Nicole Horn, and his father is Alfred Woden. Remedy would find whoever they could to be in the game. Sam Lake even said the janitor of the apartment he was staying in at the time ended up being in the game. And speaking of Sam, his facial expressions in the game give me a chuckle the entire time. Max Payne feels like a game made by a small team, because it was, but it also feels like a genuine passion project. There are some games that have used comic panel cutscenes since Max Payne, but they use them in different ways, so the cutscenes are still very unique. Another thing that makes Max Payne's story memorable is the main character, Max. Max is a badass, cocky, and poetic character, with memorable lines and monologues. He views the entire world and every situation in metaphors, and often draws comparisons to mythology. He's always calm and collected, but he does make mistakes from time to time, and gets the shit beaten out of him. The nightmare sequences show his thoughts in over-exaggerated ways. He feels responsible for his family's death, and the nightmares he has constantly blame him for it. His personality makes the story interesting because Max is the storyteller and is narrating the story in his own unique way. And James McCaffrey was the perfect choice for the character. He pulls off the cynical and sarcastic nature of Max Payne, as well as the personal moments, perfectly.
Outside, the mercury was falling fast. It was colder than the devil's heart, raining ice pitchforks as if the heavens were ready to fall. We come to you now live from the crime scene.
Who is this?
Right back at you.
This is Deputy Chief Jim Bravura from the NYPD. You are to cease your criminal activities and surrender immediately.
Sure thing, Jim. Me and the boys have been talking, and everyone's real sorry. They'll never do it again.
Who did?
Gognitti ran out of steam in a dead-end alley with steam boiling out of the sewer grates like all the fires of hell were burning high beneath us. It was shakedown time.
What is also great about the story is some of the twists and turns that happen throughout. Throughout the game, Max is hunting those responsible for the murder of his family, but he also wants to figure out why it happened. After hitting many dead ends, Alfred Woden, leader of the Inner Circle, contacts him and tells him to take down Nicole Horn, and that they would like to do it themselves, but they have their hands tied. Max discovers that the reason why is because Nicole Horn blackmailed Alfred into staying silent. The people that killed Max's family were on a failed military drug named Valkyr. Alfred was involved in the project, but left, and to make sure Alfred didn't go public about it, Nicole bought a sex tape of Alfred with a prostitute named Candy Dawn, so as to make sure she had leverage over him. It's also revealed that the reason why Max's family was killed is because Max's wife Michelle worked at the district attorney's office and read the document about Valkyr. So they sent Valkyr druggies to deal with her. In a way, it's Alfred's fault for Max's family dying. The fact that he didn't go public about the case when he had the chance. Which is also why he helps cut all the charges against Max Payne at the end of the game, because he feels guilty. Valkyr is made a mystery throughout the game, with the plot getting deeper as it goes along. Max takes down Jack Lupino and Angelo Punchinello, but they weren't the ones at the top. They were just pawns used to gain more control. He also comes into contact with Mona, who also lost family due to the Valkyr case. Her sister Lisa was beaten to death by Angelo Punchinello, and because of that she and Max have the connection of family. Also, her sister is named Lisa. Get it? Mona Lisa? Even the characters with small screen time have their own background in this world, like Vinnie Gognitti being an incompetent mobster who will do anything to save his skin.
I'll tell you, just don't hurt me no more. Lupino's at Ragnarok, the nightclub. Book me, take me, haul me to the freaking jail, just don't hurt me.
Or Vladimir Lem being an old friend of Max who just happen to be on the opposite sides of a war and a professional criminal, though they do help each other out.
I owe you. Anything you need.
This is my solo. When I'm through, Punchinello won't be anybody's problem anymore.
Clear as vodka. But anytime you get between a rock and a hard place, just whistle. This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
You really get a bang out of this big-time gangster act, don't you?
Or BB being an undercover agent for Nicole Horn that tries to play it cool even when Max calls him out on his bullshit.
You're a bribe-taking bent cop who sold out his partner. Those mobsters in the subway were a dead giveaway. Hard to miss. Bet it was exactly like this with Alex. Up close and personal.
You can't win this one, Max.
No, but I can make damn sure none of you do either.
Every character is memorable in their background and personality. Max Payne's story may have its simple premise, but it has memorable characters, unique cutscenes, unforgettable dialogue, a character who tells his story in an eccentric but interesting way, and a mystery that progressively gets deeper the more the game goes on. The game is also perfectly paced, with each act progressing the story at a nice pace. Story-wise, this game is still great 20 years later, and I always look forward to revisiting it. Another aspect that makes this game even better is the soundtrack. Composed by Katsu Hataka and Kimo Kagesto, Max Payne's soundtrack has a diverse set of tracks for action, creepiness, atmosphere, and personal emotions. It's a really great soundtrack and fits the neo-noir tone of the game really well. In conclusion, Max Payne is a genuine masterpiece even 20 years after its original release. The gameplay is well designed and endlessly enjoyable, the story is unique, memorable, and interestingly told, and the soundtrack is awesome to listen to. There is a reason this game is looked back upon so fondly, and why I chose to do another video on this game 3 years later. This game solidified my love for Remedy. Anything Remedy works on in the future, I check out purely because of this game. As well as these two. And this game still has a community, especially with modding. There are so many mods for this game that make it really easy to go back to. It's also nice that over the 3 years of me doing videos on Remedy's games, I've gotten to meet some of the nicest people on the internet, and I'll always be thankful for that. I wish this game, as well as the sequel, got a re-release, as the versions on Steam do require some third-party patches to get working correctly. Come on, Rockstar. These games deserve a re-release. But otherwise, Max Payne is a gem and deserves to go down as one of the best video games in history. And the sequel is somehow even better.